Well, saints, if you would open your Bibles to the book of Daniel, chapter 11. Daniel, chapter 11. Now, the last time we were here, we looked at Daniel, chapter 10. And as we look to Daniel, chapter 11, verse 1 should actually be in the conclusion of chapter 10, because it simply declares also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Remember now how the angel was talking to Daniel, and he was talking about the battle that was going on between the prince of Persia and himself as he was coming to give Daniel the message. And so this first part of chapter 11 and verse 1, where in chapter 10, verse 21, he said, "But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these things except Michael, your prince. Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." So at this point, the angel is saying, I actually came and I assisted Michael in some other things in this first year of Darius the Mede. So just as a note, just make some kind of a note that chapter 11, verse 1 should have been part of the end of chapter 10 of Daniel. And then in verse 2, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th will be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece." So in verse 2, what we're seeing is this, that you're still looking at remember I talked to you about it when we went through chapter 10, and I said that chapters 10, 11, and 12 are just one complete unit. And so there's the preface, there's what's actually going on in the prophecy, and then there's that postscript between the what happened in verse or chapter 11. So the 3 are one. And so we're still looking at, where in chapter 10, verse 1, it said, "In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia." That's the timeline that we're looking at. And so then from that, in verse 2, he says, "And now I tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia." What we're going to be doing tonight, some of you will be very blessed by it. Some of you will be very lost by it. And I know it's going to happen even before we start. This is one of those passages where what God is going to do through Daniel is he's going to bring him through hundreds of years of just what is going to be going on through the land of Israel. And we're going to be looking at here, in a sense, 2 major dynasties. And these are going to be dynasties that come out of Alexander the Great. And so remember now, he had those 4 generals, and there's going to be 2. Now what happens is this, there is going to be one of his generals, Ptolemy, and he's going to be located down south of Jerusalem in Egypt. So these are things that you need to note before we even start. You have Ptolemy, who's going to be down south of Egypt. And so we're going to be seeing him, his kids, his grandkids, his great-grandkids. We're going to be seeing the family as they go through these years. Now, just north of Israel in Syria, there's another one of his generals, Seleucus. And Seleucus is where you would we're going to see that name Seleucus, or we're also going to see the name Antiochus. There's going to be many Ptolemies, there's going to be many Seleuciuses, and there's going to be many Antiochus. So what we'll find out is that a Seleucus will have a son, he'll name his name Antiochus. Antiochus will have a son, he'll name his name Seleucus after his grandfather, and then, so you just see these. And Seleucus the second will have a son, and he'll name Antiochus. And so you just see these names that are going to go through. Now, I'm going to try to keep it in order so that you can follow along. But in a sense, what a lot of chapter 11 is in the first 20-some verses is you're basically looking at the Hatfields and McCoys. If you've ever seen or heard of that, you have those 2 families and their children. They're just constantly battling, and that's what we're going to look at. Now, before you came in, out on the back, there should have been a cheat sheet for you as far as just what was going on between these two family lines. If you didn't get it, just raise your hand. Tim will make sure that you do get it, and so that you'll be able to have it. So you have them. We're all good. All right. Okay, and so with that, then what we're going to be looking at is this. In verse 2, it talks about now. And now I tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. Now, for you note takers, hopefully this won't bore you who aren't note takers, but there are some details that you should know. The first of the kings that will come in once Persia comes in and conquers Rome is Cyrus. And Cyrus is going to reign, from 559 BC to 530 BC. He reigns for 29 years. So if you're going to go down the list and jot it down, it's Cyrus first, then his son, Cambyses. His son comes in, he reigns for 7 years, for 529 to 522. His brother comes in when he dies, and he tries to, set up a rule, but it doesn't work. And so the third king that Daniel is focusing on is Darius the First, or, Darius the Great. And so he comes in and he reigns for 35 years. He reigns from 521 to 486 BC. So you have Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius, and then you have the king called Xerxes. He's going to be the fourth king. He's going to be the one who initially, as you look through history, Xerxes is going to be, as it says here, a very wealthy king. And he sets up this incredible army, and for whatever reason, he has this mindset to just wipe Greece off the face of the map. And he goes and he attacks Greece. They have this incredible battle. Xerxes does win the battle, although he's decimated in the victory. So if you've ever heard of the Battle of Thermopylae, this is what they're talking about, where Xerxes comes. So when it says here in verse 2, "Now I will tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia. The fourth shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength and through his riches he shall stir up all the realm of Greece." So this is what he does. You have, of course, Cyrus, his son Cambyses, Darius the First, and then Xerxes the First, and of course after him will be his son Artaxerxes. But so you have Xerxes, who for whatever reason has this mindset where he builds up this incredible army, and he wants to take off, and wipe out Greece. Now, he does win, but his army is so decimated that basically he begins to lose power, and so Artaxerxes himself has less power than what his father does. However, through taking on Greece, they now have made Greece a bitter enemy. So when Alexander it grows up and he says, well, I'm going to start conquering, as he begins to take over Greece, he becomes in power, and then he begins to, move further and further. Eventually, his whole mind says, I want to take on Persia, and that's what he does. Now, if you remember, there's been 2 prophecies that we've looked at already in the book of Daniel dealing with Greece. The first is found in Daniel chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar has that dream. And as he has that dream, Daniel gives him the dream. He gives him the interpretation. And in Daniel 2, verse 32, he says, the image head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So we saw that here, this belly and thighs of bronze, we noted how that would be Alexander the Great. The next time that we saw Alexander the Great was in that prophecy that Daniel had, that dream that he had, where it wasn't this great image like Nebuchadnezzar saw, but it was a beast. And here in Daniel chapter 7, it declares this. Verse 6, after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings like a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And so we see that as Daniel begins to have his vision of the world leaders, he sees this leopard, a fast animal, and of course with wings, because Alexander conquers the known world very quickly. But then it talks about the 4 heads. And we noted how he had those 4 generals. He had Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Those 4 generals that we noted were there. And what we're going to focus on here in Daniel chapter 11 are basically 2 of those 4 generals. The reason being, we talked about Ptolemy being in Egypt and Seleucus being there in Syria. When they battle one another, what they're doing is this: they're going through Israel. So when Ptolemy goes up and battles Syria, he goes right through Israel. And if he has a bad day, he kicks Israel on his way down. And then if Seleucus or Antiochus goes down to Egypt and battles them, he's going to what? He's going right through Israel. And if he has a bad day, he's going to kick Israel on the way home. And so you see that what Daniel is focusing on is basically the nation of Israel. He wants them to understand what's going to be happening north and south of them, because as these 2 generals, as these 2 dynasties begin to anchor in, they are going to be the Hatfields and McCoys. They are going to be warring against one another continually. And the warring against one another is going to be just simply bad news for Israel. So just draw that in your mind as we go. So you have here this 4th king, Xerxes. For whatever reason, through his strength and his might, he builds up this incredible army, but he wants to take out Greece. He does so at a cost. Greece eventually, verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with a great dominion and do according to his will. This is Alexander the Great. Verse 4, when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these. So at this point, when he does, as he conquers the world and he dies at the age of around 33, that he now doesn't give his kingdom to his sons. One of his sons already dead. The other one doesn't, live much longer after Alexander. So his kingdom doesn't go to his sons, but it goes to his generals. And that's why it says here, verse 4, when he has arisen, when he's at the top of his game, when he's taken over the world, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds, each of his 4 generals, but not among his posterity. So the generals get the kingdoms, not his children, nor according to the dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. Now, in verse 5, it talks about also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His land shall be a great dominion. And at the end, verse 6, of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So as we look to this, let me just try to break it down to you. In verse 5, it says also the king of the south. This is Ptolemy Lagus. He's Ptolemy the first. He's now there in the south. He's there. Whenever you say Ptolemy, just think of Egypt. Whenever we say Seleucus or Antiochus, think of Syria. So just think of north and south as we go through this. So the king of the south, Ptolemy the first, shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. And so him and his son, he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now, when he has power over him, you're looking at here that he's going to have power over basically Seleucus, who's there in Syria. He has a greater power. So initially, when these two dynasties are started, the southern one, Ptolemy, is stronger than the Seleucian dynasty. Now, what he does is this. He offers him, in a sense, this kind of a treaty. So in verse 6, it says this: at the end of some years, they shall join forces for the daughter of the king of the south. Now, this daughter here is the daughter of Ptolemy II. Her name is Berenice. And so now you had the first king of the south in verse 5, who is Ptolemy I. So when you see the Ptolemy, the king of the south, now this is Ptolemy II. So it's already moving on in history. Well, his daughter, Berenice, it declares this at the end, verse 6, of some years they shall join forces. So it's not here the Ptolemy I, but his son, Ptolemy II, they're going to join forces for the daughter of the king of the south, the daughter of Ptolemy II, shall go to the king of the north. Now, this is going to be Antiochus II. So I know there's names, I know there's numbers here, I know it's going to be a little confusion, but so you have now the sons and grandsons of the first two generals. Egypt sends their daughter to Syria, and her name is Berenice. Now, as they do this, verse 6, it says this, that the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. In other words, to build an alliance. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up. The term means she will be killed with those who brought her, and with those who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. What happened was this, that when Ptolemy II offered his daughter Berenice to Antiochus II, he said, I want you to take my daughter, and I want you to build this alliance. The problem was that Antiochus II was already married. And so what he said was this, well, divorce your wife, marry my daughter. So the wife that he had initially was Laodicea. And Laodicea, what she did is she accepted the divorce, she moved off, and then he married here Berenice. Now, not long after the marriage, and that's why it says it doesn't take too long of a time, what happened was this, Ptolemy II died. And as he died, now all of a sudden, that Antiochus II, he's thinking, well, you know, I don't really like Berenice as much as I liked my first wife. So he asked his first wife to come back and be his wife again. So what Laodicea does is this, is she comes back, and the very first night that she is with her husband, she murders him. And after she murders her husband, then she murders Berenice, and then she murders their children. So what happened was this intrigue that went on. And so at this point now, you see here the king of the south of verse 6, Ptolemy II, he simply dies. And so then Antiochus II says, I don't really want to marry your daughter. This alliance isn't working out. He divorces, or he moves her off to the side as he brings his first wife back. She murders him, she murders Berenice, and she murders their child. And so then you see what happens here. Take a look at verse 6 again. At the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north. So in other words, marry Berenice, to make an agreement, to make an alliance, but she shall not retain the power of her authority. In other words, it's not going to last long, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. In other words, what the Ptolemy II wanted isn't going to be, and so, but she shall be given up because she dies, and those who brought her, and with him who begot her, so he died, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So basically all of that Ptolemy II, Antiochus II, Berenice, they're all dead now. And so we see here as Laodicea's son, and of course with Antiochus, as their son begins to be in the reign, in verse 7 it says, but from a branch of her roots, now this is her brother, Ptolemy III. Her brother, because of her death, from one of the branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortresses of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry away their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So we see here this intrigue of these Hatfields and McCoys. Once Berenice dies, her brother then comes and to bring revenge, goes and attacks the king of the north. Now, when he attacks, in verse 7, the king of the north, this king here is named Seleucus II. Now, I told you the names are going to bounce from Seleucus to Antiochus, but just understand it's the son. So initially you have these two that are Ptolemy and Antiochus II, both of those. They have this thing, they both die, and so their two sons now come. The son of the south attacks the north because his sister died in that murder. And so what we see is this: Ptolemy III has a victorious conquering of Syria. But as he goes through, keep in mind, they're trampling through Israel, they're coming back through Israel. And so in verse 7, the branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place and come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. So as he goes to exact revenge for his sister, he wins. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt. So while he's there, he takes the riches. He says, well, I'm not just going to leave just wiping you out. I'm going to make this worth my while. And so he shall carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Also the king of the north, and so we see it's the same guy now, Seleucus II. The king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So after we see that Ptolemy III goes and attacks Seleucus II. Seleucus II says, well, I'm going to come back and I'm going to try the same thing. But he doesn't do very well. His attack fails. And so that's what it says in verse 9. Now the king of the north, after they took all their gods, I want to go get my gods. So he comes to the kingdom of the south, but he shall return to his own land. So in other words, he loses the battle, doesn't get his gods, and so he has to go back to the north. Now, verse 10, however, his sons shall stir up strife. So now you have the next generation, and they too are going to be at odds. And so you have these two sons, and this is Ptolemy IV and Antiochus III. Keep in mind, I told you the names are switching. It's easier if you just go, their sons, and their sons. That's what we're looking at here. So in verse 11, the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. And when he was taken away, the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will return and muster the multitude greater than the former, and he shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Now, what we're going to see is this. I want you to note here, and for your note takers, get this clear in verses 10 through 19. This all deals with these two sons. So this whole section, you're not switching around. You're simply dealing with Ptolemy IV and Antiochus III. That's what you're looking at in verses 10 through 19. Now, initially what we see is this, verse 10. The two sons stir up strife. In other words, they're battling one another. They're Still trying to figure out who gets whose gods, who's in charge, that kind of thing. So the sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Now this pass through is a key, because what is he talking about? Going right through Israel. And anytime they go through, like back in verse 9, where the kingdom of the north shall come to the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. When he fails, guess what he's doing? He's kicking Israel. They're just constantly in their frustration. So we see this, and I want you to just make a note of it, that here in verse 10, where it says, however, the two sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. This says that Israel is this pathway between the kings of Syria and the kings of Egypt. So between the north and the south, every time they come, and if you're a highlighter or underliner, mark that in verse 10 and pass through, and then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. Now, verse 11, the king of the south, Ptolemy the fourth, what he does this, in history it's known as the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC, so if you want to look that up, you can. But the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, the king of the north. So Ptolemy the fourth goes up through Israel, fights with Antiochus the third, and they shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his army. And when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So at this point, he goes up, and he goes against he gets a multitude, goes against a multitude, his army wins. And so we see in verse 12, when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. So in other words, he's going to have this short-term victory. That's all it's talking about in verse 12. Verse 13, for the king of the north will return. So now you have him, Antiochus the third. He comes down to the south. For the king of the north will return and muster a greater than the former. So now he has even more in his army as he comes down, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. So it takes him a few years to come back from that initial beating there in verse 12. He now comes back with a vengeance in verse 13. But verse 14 is kind of like a parenthetical verse. Now, in those times, many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So he's saying that in this interim, what's going to happen in verse 14, there are apostate Jews that say, you know what, we're going to try to take some of the land of Egypt as well. So as they go against the Ptolemies, all of a sudden we see it's a very short battle, but it does say that Israel, the apostate Jews in verse 14, violent men among your people, call them simply apostate Jews, they're going to exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, because God said it was going to happen, but they shall fall. So the king of the north, verse 15, that's Antiochus the third, he shall come and build a siege mound and take a fortified city, and forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So at this point, as Antiochus III comes in and retaliates back to the south, as he attacks Ptolemy IV, we see he has even a greater army, he has greater siege equipment, and it basically, what we see is this: he's able to do whatever he wants. Look at verse 16 one more time. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. So as he comes down now, Antiochus III, comes and attacks Ptolemy IV. He's victorious. But what happens is this, in verse 17, he shall also set his face to enter the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or before him. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and he shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. In this part here, we see that as he comes down in verse 16, he's doing everything that he wants to do. Now, in verse 17, he sort of sets it up where, okay, I've won now, but what I want to do is this. Let's make, in a sense, a truce. So what he does in verse 17 is he gives his daughter, Antiochus III gives his daughter to Ptolemy IV. Now, this is where I love it. Do you want to know who his daughter is? Cleopatra. This is where Cleopatra comes on the scene. Now, when he gives his daughter to Egypt, as he gives his daughter, his whole thought is this. Keep in mind that Ptolemy does have a son, but as he has a son, Ptolemy V does have a son, but his son is simply a younger boy at this point. But he still gives his daughter Cleopatra to marry him, saying that, listen, when he grows up, this is what I want you to do. I want you to manipulate him. I want you to control him. I want you to be the one who really rules here in Egypt. I want you to be the head of Ptolemy's, not the boy. So that's what he's trying to set up. So look at verse 17 again with that in mind. Now, as he sets up for his daughter Cleopatra to rule and kind of control the little boy as he grows up, what he didn't realize is this. As that little boy would grow up, he would grow into a handsome man, and Cleopatra would fall in love with him. And as she would fall in love with him, eventually she would then turn against her father. She wouldn't do anything like that. And that relationship would last until Mark Antony. And then, of course, that's going to be the end of that. But initially, what we're seeing here is, as Scripture points out, that we're going to see that Antiochus III gives his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy IV, because Ptolemy went up and attacked. It worked, but he says, okay, now I'm going to come and I'm going to retaliate. So he gets a greater army. He gets more equipment. He comes. And verse 17 says, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom. In other words, I'm going to take over this. But with the upright ones and with him, thus he shall do, and he shall give him the daughter of women. In other words, I'm going to give you my daughter Cleopatra to destroy it. In other words, to take over the kingdom. But she shall not stand with him or be for him. So she's going to ditch her father for this kid, Ptolemy V, and she's just going to simply fall in love with him. So she's going to turn her back, so she's not going to stand with him or before him, because she loves her husband. And after this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands. So now we see that Antiochus III starts attacking the coastlands. But as he does that, we see that he shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against him to an end. As he begins to attack the coastal lands, in other words, going up through Syria and going up into Turkey, eventually he's rebuffed by this ruler. So in verse 18, when it says he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and he shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against him, this is the young Roman Empire. So Rome comes, stops here Antiochus III from taking the coastlands, and what he does is he just sends them back packing. So it says in verse 18, the ruler shall bring the reproach against him to an end. With the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. So Now that he doesn't have the coastal lands, he comes back, and of course he wants to, take over Egypt again. Well, in verse 19, then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So at this point, he's going to seek to unite all of Greece. And as he tries to bring all of Greece, because he's going to the coastlands, he says, listen, we should all be a consolidated Greece once again. Let's not be 4 generals. Let it just be under me. And so he tries to, but Rome gets in the way, and so he fails. And at this point, when he comes back to his land, and he's going to stumble and fall and not be found. So he basically dies on the way back to try to unite all of Greece together again. And verse 20, then there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. Now, in verse 20, what we're going to see is this. We're still talking about the king of the north. So Antiochus III is going to have a son, and his name is going to be Seleucus IV. In other words, it's just another son. But this son here, Seleucus, who's the son of Antiochus, he's going to say, listen, my dad has been just raising up armies and equipment, and we're broke. So he begins to impose taxes upon his the people who are in his kingdom. And as he does so, like most taxes, people don't like them. And so we see in verse 20, as his son Seleucus IV comes, there shall arise one in his place, one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or battle. He's going to be poisoned. And so he's poisoned by a guy by the name of Heliodorus. And basically he's there. He begins the kingdom. He says, we need to make some money. I'm going to raise your taxes. And so he's poisoned. Wow. That's, nobody likes the IRS. And so in his place now, because he's gone quickly, in his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. So at this point you have another son, Antiochus IV. His name, as we know, is Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes comes in at this point, and he's a sweet talker. And it says they don't simply give it to him, but he comes in and he talks peaceably, and he seizes the kingdom by intrigue. He begins to, conquer everything by just understanding how to politically destroy everyone. Verse 22, with force and with a flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. So we see here that through this now, Antiochus comes, and not only does he now take Syria, but he also comes and he begins to take Israel as well. And this is what it says here in verse 22, and with force and flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. He's going to take over and conquer the high priest, and then after that he's going to set up his own priests that he's going to set up to be vassals for him. And so this is now Antiochus Epiphanes. He has Syria, and now he has the Holy Land as well. Now verse 23, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with the number of his people. And he shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province. And he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, the spoil, the riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So at this point, he plunders Israel. And after he plunders Israel in verse 25, now he's going to go and invade Egypt. So where the one guy, Seleucus IV, tries to do taxes. Antiochus Epiphanes says, we don't have to do taxes. We'll just take out Israel, and we'll raid the money from Israel. So that's what he does, in other words, to make the funds to war against Egypt in verses 25 through 27. Now let's follow through this. He shall stir up his power and with his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will be at the appointed time. Now, as here Antiochus comes and wipes out, takes Israel's wealth, raises up now and goes attacks Egypt. It says again in verse 25, he shall stir up the power with his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great arm and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. In other words, the strategy of the northern armies of Syria beats the kings of the southern armies of Egypt. Now, verse 26, yes, those who eat the portions of his delicacies shall destroy him. So we see that he's basically, his leadership says, we're going to basically turn on you, and we're going to give Antiochus access in. And now as they do that, we see here, those who eat the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So basically, as Egypt is being destroyed, now keep in mind, what Antiochus wants is to completely destroy Egypt. But what happens is this: he just mostly destroys Egypt. So him and the king of Egypt now sit down at a table in verse 27. And as they sit at the table, what they're doing is this: they're talking about friendship. They're talking about alliances. They're talking about let's get together and let's help one another out. And so as they're sitting at the table, what they're doing is this: they're lying through their teeth. It says in verse 27, but both these kings' heart shall be bent on evil. So Antiochus is saying, okay, let's make an agreement. But he doesn't really want to make it. He wants to conquer, but he's saying, let's make an agreement. And the one king of the south says, okay, yeah, let's make an agreement. But both of them, they shall speak lies at the same table. They're talking about friendship. They're talking about a partnership. But both of them are lying through their teeth. Now, in verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper. For the end will still be at the appointed time. So they're going to be saying, let's do this, but what it's saying is this: but God's still in control. You can't change anything. Now, while returning to his land with great riches, so at this point, as Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, starts coming up, he has the riches from Egypt. He hasn't completely wiped them out, but they've given him a ton of wealth. While returning, verse 28, to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. Because he didn't utterly wipe out Egypt, he comes and he kicks Israel while they're down. One more time, we see that's what's happening. So Verse 28, while returning to his own land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against a holy covenant, so he shall do damage to return to his own land. And at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the later. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, and therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. At this point, after he has that time, that sit down with the king of the south, and they say, let's make an alliance, let's do these things, and we'll be friends. Eventually now, he comes down to take that alliance and really say, I want all of Egypt. But as he does in verse 29, at the appointed time he shall return. Now, when he comes back, what he didn't realize this is that the king of Egypt had made an alliance with Rome. And so when he comes down, it's the same Rome that stopped him from uniting all of Greece back, where we saw back there in verse 18, that same Rome now being even stronger than it used to be. So verse 29, at the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former times or the latter. It's not going to be like it was. You're not going to have this victory. Why? For the ships from Cyprus, this is Rome, shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. At this point, what the Roman general does is he goes to Antiochus and he says, listen, he draws a line in the sand. Now, historians have two areas in which they say. One, he draws a line in the sand. He says, if you step over this line in the sand and try to come to Egypt, to the king of the south, to Ptolemy, we're going to kill you. The other is this. They say they actually drew a line completely around Ptolemy, and he says, listen, if you step out of that line, if you step across the line, you're just dead unless you surrender. Ptolemy now is angry. Because of the power of Rome, he cannot take on a victory over Egypt like he wanted to. So understand in verse 30, there's a line in the sand that's drawn by Rome, and now Antiochus has to go back in shame, utterly just, humiliated because he couldn't go and do what he wanted to. Rome was too powerful. So in verse 30, the ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return in his rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And the forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Now, as Antiochus Epiphanes is humiliated because of Rome, and he couldn't conquer Egypt, he now goes back to Israel. And at this point, historians say that in one day he killed over 40,000 Jews. Over 40,000 Jews. And within the next year, he would add that number up to over 100,000. So as he's here raging, verse 30, the ships of Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved. He's humiliated, he's embarrassed, he's angry, he's grieved, and he returns in rage against the holy city, the holy covenant, to do damage. Wipes out 40,000 Israelites, and so he shall return to show regard to those who forsake the holy covenant. So everyone who's against Israel, he says, you come on my side. I just want to do damage. So verse 31, the forces shall be mustered by him. They shall defile the sanctuary fortress. They shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. This is where he sets up an idol in the temple. And he sacrifices a pig on the altar, and he smears the blood on the altar. He makes the high priest drink the blood of the pig. And so as he sets up this idol, keep in mind that it's either an idol of him, a statue of himself, or it's a statue of Zeus. Historians differ, and I'm not here to figure out which is which. I just know it's an idol that he sets up in there. And so we see here, verse 31, the forces shall be mustered by him. They shall defile the sanctuary, the fortresses. They shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Now verse 32. And those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Now, those of the Jews who are apostates, in other words, those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. Those apostate Jews he brings to his side. However, at the end of verse 32, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. He's talking about the Maccabees, particularly Judas Maccabea. And as they come, they now do this guerrilla warfare against Antiochus. And as they begin to do that, verse 33, and the people, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days, and they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. But many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So at this point, we see here that through this, there's going to be just this great battle, this war that goes between the Maccabees and Antiochus. And eventually they're going to drive him out. But you also have these apostate Jews that are not helping the situation. They're not united in the cause. You have just that family, the Maccabees, and then of course there's more and more who will come and aid them and be added to them. Now in verse 36, you have to understand that what is going to happen is this. There's a radical shift from the time of this intertestamental period. It's no longer the time that is here through the Seleucians and the Ptolemies. You're not dealing with the Hatfields and McCoys anymore. Now you're jumping in verse 36 to Daniel's 70th week. So make a note of that, gravitate to that, and realize what's going on. Verse 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. This is not the Ptolemies, this is not the Seleuciuses, this is not Antiochus. This is the Antichrist himself. So this is the king who has the 10 horns. That's him. This is the one who is known as the Antichrist. So in verse 36, the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god and speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. So as the Antichrist comes, you know that he's going to set up this 3.5-year peace treaty. He's going to be like Antiochus, coming in initially with sweet-sounding words. He's going to set up this peace treaty. So he's going to be there, and he's going to come supposedly peaceably, like Antiochus Epiphanes did. But what's going to happen is this. Eventually, he's going to have just a short amount of time. He's going to break that covenant 3.5 years into that 70th week. So 3.5 years into that last 7-year period, he's going to go and he's going to break that covenant, and he's going to seek to do damage to Israel. So again, verse 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. In other words, just as Satan said, I'm going to exalt my throne above God's throne, this is what the Antichrist does. And he's going to speak blasphemy against the God of gods. So he says, out of all gods, I'm the greatest. But notice this, even though he wants to exalt himself above all idols, he specifically points out the God of Israel and blasphemes him. It's interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard someone say, oh, for Buddha's sake, or oh, for Confucius' sake, or oh, for Muhammad's sake. They don't say that, but they will use God's name in vain, and they will use Jesus' name in vain. You don't see him use Buddha's name in vain. You don't see him use Muhammad's name in vain, but always the Lord and always our Christ. And so we see here, he's going to blaspheme against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for that which has been determined shall be done. In other words, there's going to be 1 7-year period. Now within this, as he breaks that covenant, verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. Now, we talked about in that vision how this Antichrist is going to come out of the revived Roman Empire. Remember the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed, that at the end was the feet of clay and the toes and the legs of iron, and the feet and the toes of iron and clay. So you have that Antichrist, you have the 10 rulers that are there. It's a revived Roman Empire. He comes out of that. So we know that he comes out of this revived Roman Empire. Some believe it's now the European nations. But understand that what verse 37 depicts is this, that there is a hint that the Antichrist, although he's there coming out of the Roman Empire, is in fact an Israelite. And so it says in verse 37, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. Now, keep in mind that they say the desire of women, if you want to know what that is, it's basically this. The desire of women would be this. With the prophecy that a virgin was going to have a child, what women desired was this: I want to be the instrument through which the Messiah is born. That is what the desire of the women were. So when you see verse 37, let me read it this way. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers nor the Messiah. Because every woman wanted to be the vessel to bring forth the Messiah. So basically, that's what you're looking at. There are some people who say the desire of women means that he's a homosexual. I do not agree with that because it doesn't fit the context here. But you do see it fits the God of his father and the Messiah. We talked about there in Daniel chapter 9, the one who would come. This is who he has no regard for at all, the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above all. But he focuses mainly on the Father and Jesus Christ. And he says, but I'm still above all gods. Now in verse 38, but in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. And he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign God, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. At this point, we see that here, his God, he's going to honor a God of the fortresses. He honors the God of power. He honors the God of war. In other words, his God is violence and warfare. And it's interesting that he says the God which his fathers did not know. In other words, the warfare of where Israel, after David, through after they've conquered the land, because God said that this is your land, they're not moving out, they're already dead completely. You need to remove them so that you're not poisoned. Of course, we know that didn't work all that well. But he does say this, in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, which is a God which his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. If you know one thing about war, it is costly. There's just, when we're making tanks and airplanes and we're spending billions and billions and trillions of dollars just to once again amp up so that we can, one, compete with the rest of the world in armament. And so, but we see in verse 38, he's going to honor the God of fortress, and he shall honor him with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things. He's going to have no problem paying for all of the power that he can have to use against these other countries. And so, verse 39, he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, and he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So as the Antichrist begins, he came on the scene speaking peace, but now at the end of that 3.5 years, after the abomination of desolation, he begins to turn not only on Israel, but he begins to conquer every other nation. And those nations that won't submit to him peaceably, he's going to make them submit just through power. But it says in verse 40, when he's trying to conquer all these lands. Let me read verse 39 before I read 40 again. Then he shall act against the strongest fortresses. He's going to attack these strong nations that don't want to submit willingly with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. And verse 40, and at the time of the end of the king, at the time of the end, this is towards that very end of the 3.5 years, this is coming now to the battle of Armageddon. At that time, the king of the south shall attack him. So all of a sudden, the king of the south is going to Egypt and Africa. They're going to come up and they're going to attack the Antichrist. They're saying, you're not going to rule over us. And then it says, verse 40, at the time of the king of the south shall attack him, the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter the country and overwhelm them and pass through. So not only is Egypt and Africa, are they going to be attacking the Antichrist, but then Russia says, we're going to attack the Antichrist. Verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, the prominent people of Ammon, and he shall stretch out his hand against the countries and against the land, and Egypt shall not escape. So he begins to attack these nations who are attacking him. Verse 43, he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, all the monies of the world, because he now controls Babylon. He controls all commerce, so he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over the precious things of Egypt. And also the Libyans, the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. So all of a sudden, the thing that's happening with Russia coming down, the Chinese army, the 2 billion army that comes over from China, the 1 million man army that hits there. And I think right now, China's army is like 2.8 billion. That's a huge army that these guys have. And so, could be in the 2.8 million. Let me make that correction. And he says this, verse 44, but the news from the east and from the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas of the glorious holy mountain, and yet he shall come to his end and no one will help him. So at this point we see that they come now to this place of Armageddon. They come to Megiddo, and or they come to the valley of Megiddo. So that they come to this place, the valley. We see that here all these nations are initially going to rise against the Antichrist. But as the Lord comes down, it's interesting that they turn from attacking the Antichrist to simply attacking the Lord. And so through this, we see just this incredible gathering of armies. Initially, they gather to be against the Antichrist. And then as the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints, we come with the Lord. And then God just says, with the word of my mouth, you're all done. And so we see here just what's been happening as it shifts now from these kings of the north and south to the actual Antichrist. And as he comes through, what he's going to do with Israel, what he's going to do as he seeks to conquer the rest of the world. So we see that he comes in as a man of peace, but eventually he ends up as a man of war. So what I want to do is I want to close by just making a note of this, that as we went through these prophecies, you can look them up in history, and it literally follows these two dynasties, literally son after son after son after son, which is why the critics of Daniel say this: Daniel could not have been written before this happened. It had to be written afterwards. There's no way that you could have this kind of exactness with giving daughters and treaties and who wins and who doesn't, because it lines up perfectly with history. It had to be written after. The problem being is this, that Daniel was translated into Greek before these events took place. And so it couldn't have happened after, but that's not what they say. Now keep in mind, the reason why God wanted Israel to know this is for one reason. One, Israel, you're going to be this path between these two dynasties, between the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. Between the north and the south kings, they're going to go up and down, up and down. They're going to trample all over you. You need to know this. And so what he does is this: he tells them how these events and when these events are going to take place, so that when they know that took place with pinpoint accuracy, know this: what happens with the Antichrist is going to happen with pinpoint accuracy. There is going to be no, it might be this or it might be that. When God makes prophecy into history, and that's what happens. We're reading prophecy, but we're seeing it as history. Now, when Daniel spoke it, keep in mind that these kings weren't even there. Rome wasn't, any kind of power. Greece wasn't a power even at this time. This is during the time of Cyrus. And he's saying there's going to be 4 kings later. And after Cyrus' son Cambyses, and after Darius, and after Xerxes come, he's going to be the one to stir up Greece. And then Greece through Alexander is going to go and conquer the world. And then you're going to have his generals. And these generals are going to be battling. Only the two of them, the north and south, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, are going to be battling back and forth. These guys weren't even around yet. And Daniel prophesies all these things so that one thing becomes perfectly clear: that Israel realizes there's going to be an Antichrist. But to know this, he's not going to last long. He gives them hope. God is going to set up a kingdom. However, the kingdom that he's going to set up, they don't quite fully understand. Remember, Messiah is going to come on an appointed time, exactly when God said he would, to the very day. But when he comes, he's going to be cut off, but not for himself. That he's going to come and he's going to literally seek to save his children. He's going to seek to save Israel, but he's not going to save them as a conquering king. He's going to save them from their sins. He's not going to save them from a temporary battle. He's going to save them from what? Eternal damnation. That's what he's seeking to do. And so if this prophetic word that people want to deny, understand that God is saying, I know history. And as he knows the history of these two dynasties, understand this: he knows the history of you and of me. He knows everything that's going to transpire. He knows who's going to cross our path, who's going to seek to kick us when we're down, who's going to pick us up when we've been kicked. He knows all these things about us too. And he wants us to say, I want to give you hope. Because at the very end of this, he says what? There's going to be victory. And at the very end of our life, we who put our faith in Jesus Christ, guess what he's saying to us? I'm going to give you victory. And that's what we stand on. That's our hope. Amen? Father, we do thank you for this word. And Lord, I know that it was long, it was arduous. I know that there was a lot of names. I know there was sons after sons after sons. And as we went through the events that for us is just history, but to Daniel, they were a prophetic word that came from the angel. The angel gives Daniel these words. It's so incredible that they came to pass with pinpoint accuracy. We read prophecy as history. How incredible is that? And one day, Lord, one day there is going to be a people, and we will be among them, who will read Revelation as history. That is a promise, and I can't wait to do that. Not Revelation as prophecy, but Revelation as history. And we're going to look at every promise that you've made in your scripture, and we're going to see the fulfillment that has been through the years and through the ages, and how you will be faithful to fulfill these things. So we trust in you. We rest in you. We know the plan that you had for Israel is good, and the plan that you have for us is good. Help us rest in your wisdom and your sovereignty. We ask this in Jesus' name, and all the saints of God said, amen.